approach, data collection approach, findings, and then the training AMP coaches using a web-based tool. Okay, so for introductions, my name is Celeste Seibel. I'm the project manager of the Achievement Plan project.
I'm sure. Oh, well, there you go. I'm Sharice Jackson. I started as an AMP coach on the project, and I am now an AMP trainer.
I'm Janet Walker. I'm the director of the Research and Training Center, Pathways Research and Training Center, as well as co-director of the National Wraparound Initiative.
And the PI of Achievement Plan. Okay. So what is AMP? AMP stands for Achievement Plan, and it was an intervention designed for young people with serious mental health challenges, and has been developed to support young people to learn skills, set goals, become more active and engaged in their treatment planning. And AMP was originally designed to be a wraparound enhancement. Okay. So, Janet, would you like to talk a little bit about why we enhanced wraparound?
Okay, so the reason that we got started on this whole AMP project was because our early research, including probably one of my very first wraparound projects, I went around and observed wraparound teams in 11 states and 72 different wraparound teams. And when people nominated the top concern that they had about wraparound, for both providers and young people, it was young people's engagement in wraparound. And that's continued to be true, I think, indicated by a lot of the data that we gather through different modalities, through the WAFA system, through our community support system, and certainly anecdotally. There's also some research which is reviewed on a publication that we have on our website. If you look at Pathways RTC, if you put that into a web search, you can see the Achieve My Plan projects. We have a bunch of publications associated with that project. And originally we reviewed the research on treatment planning, which documented pretty convincingly that young people were not meaningfully engaged in team treatment planning in either the IEP process and systems of care and wraparound specifically. And again, as I mentioned, the professionals were also not satisfied and felt that they did not have good strategies for how to engage young people. And certainly I would say that our ongoing experiences reinforce that still when we come to sites are very eager for support around this particular topic. So this is what we call original AMP, and you'll see the need for that later because we now have 2 new AMPs. And the idea was really to develop an enhancement that would require minimal, if any, resources, but that could dramatically increase youth participation. So we wanted a good bang for the buck ratio. And to help us ensure that we were doing something that would be feasible and attractive, we worked extensively with an advisory board when we developed AMP. So we co-developed AMP with young people, family members, and service providers. And originally we did a pilot study. We had a pre-post study that showed really substantial improvements from before AMP to after in terms of young people's participation and also their engagement, like how much they felt that the planning process was being responsive to them and how satisfied they were. So on the basis of that data and that experience, we undertook the randomized study that we're going to talk about today. And this took place in 3 counties in the Portland, Oregon metro area and compared young people who were receiving wraparound as usual versus young people who were receiving wraparound with the AMP enhancement. I think that's it for me.
Yes.
Okay.
So guiding without leading. So in conversation with another person about their thoughts and ideas, a delicate balancing act, as you can see by the picture. This is where the young person's not totally leading the session, the coach isn't leading the session, but they're kind of having that balance. Why is guiding without leading so important? Well, it really encapsulates the AMP's theory of change. Guiding the coach's role is to provide strong facilitation of a process for helping young people define their own goals and take action with the team's support. So just really all the ideas, the goals, the thoughts, all coming from the young person. It really focuses on teaching the steps of the process, so really increasing those self-determination skills of the young person, and really helping the young person construct experiences where they will deploy new skills and learn. again, why is it so important? Without leading really ensures a youth-driven approach. Again, the young person's having the confidence in their own interests, ideas, and capacities. The coach is active in guiding the young people to see themselves as having those strengths and capacities, so it's not just the coach telling them that they're having them, but it's actually encouraging the young person to really believe it. So this was the intervention. So we would have a total of 3 prep sessions before their team meeting. So prep 1 would really focus on identifying the young person's strengths and goals and drafting a plan of like an activity that they're interested in doing. Prep 2 would be setting the agenda for their RAP meeting, which may have been a little different than how their current RAP meetings were going. So they would really decide what areas of the agenda that they'd want to lead, what they'd want others to lead. They would identify some support and think of like who really they want at the meeting. Prep 3 would be really practicing for the meeting. So reviewing the agenda, they have tools like flashcards, really going over that plan for support and the support they need during the meeting. And then there'd be the team meeting. And then after the intervention was over, then we'd hand it off to the care coordinators to kind of pick up where the coach would leave off.
Can I just make one clarification? So the preparation for AMP is there's sort of 2 main pieces to it. One is for the young person to select an activity that's connected to a goal that they find personally meaningful. So they're placing that from their own perspective. It's something that gets added to the agenda. And we have a process for ensuring it's something that the team is going to support, but it comes from their perspective. And then we also prepare them, coach them on how to contribute to the other agenda items. So all the agenda items that the rest of the team brings. So the activity that they do is usually a fairly small portion of the meeting, but it's something that completely comes out of their ideas. So that's an addition, and the rest is just preparing them to interact positively and productively with the team, and to have ideas about what the other agenda items are, if that's placement or treatment or whatever it is, so that they can really actively speak up for their perspective during the team meeting.
So ways that the AMP coach would support the young person at the team meeting, they would really act as a process advocate. They'd model and enforce team meeting ground rules to the rest of the team. They'd really keep the meeting on track and moving forward, really creating an inclusive environment where the youth's participation is really included in the meeting, really keeping the meeting focused on the agenda, and just ensuring that everyone is really clear about the next steps and responsibilities. Some other ways that the AMP coach supported youth at meetings, just really assisting the young person if they got lost or overwhelmed, really asking the team members sometimes to slow down and maybe explain acronyms if they're using big words or things are unclear or confusing, providing the young person with opportunities to share comments. So again, just really including the young person's voice and participation in the meeting, and really modeling that effective communication and just ways that the team can include the young person's voice in the meeting.
Okay. All right. Like Janet mentioned earlier, we worked with 3 wraparound providers that were in the Portland metro area, and that was Multnomah County, Clackamas County, and Washington County. And the criteria for young people to participate in the study is they needed to be receiving wraparound services, and they also needed to be between the ages of 11 and a half and 15 and a half if they were in care. And if they were not in care, then it was 11 and a half and 18. And that's because we had an ongoing study that was also looking at the same age group, and we just didn't want our interventions to cross over with each other, so that's why we had that change in age there. And then the only other criteria was that the young person was likely to receive wraparound services for the next 6 months, so they have a chance to experience the intervention all the way through. Okay, so design and measures. Like we've mentioned, it was a randomized study, and the care coordinators were randomly assigned as control or intervention groups. And then as the incoming new clients were randomly assigned to either the control or intervention care coordinators. So we made the choice to randomize the care coordinators opposed to the young people, because we felt like it would be confusing for the care coordinators to be practicing AMP with some young people and then not practicing AMP with the control group. So that's why we made that decision. In terms of our assessments, we were looking at telephone and online surveys, and that went to young people, caregivers, and care coordinators. We also did post-meeting evaluation, so at the end of the meetings, how did it go? What did they think? And then also we recorded one team meeting video and looked at certain things like the amount the young person was contributing, types of questions that were asked to the young person, those types of factors. And these were our measures that we used. So we were looking specifically for youth participation, alliance with the team, mental health, recovery, and meeting satisfaction. And as you'll notice, the Y stands for young person, CG caregiver, and CC care coordinator. So we pretty much used the same measures for everybody except for the mental health recovery scale that we used. So here is our timeline. And basically the young person and the caregiver would be consented into the study. And then we would complete the first assessment, so baseline before any intervention work was done. And then we would then again assess right after the target team meeting. And those of you familiar with Wraparound, usually Wraparound meetings happen about every 30 days. So then we would again, there would be a second team meeting. And this would be the point that the care coordinator would take over the work that was being done. So our AMP coaches would then transfer their work onto the care coordinator with the young person. And then we would again, let's see if there's any other animation. I kind of like animation, so I think it's kind of jazzy. And then we would follow along for that third team meeting. So then after the third team meeting, we would assess one more time. So it was a very brief intervention, and we looked at it again across about 3 team meetings. Missed that. Okay, so here are our totals. We had a total of 55 young people that participated in the study. 20 were control, 35 were intervention. A total of 47 caregivers, 19 were control, 28 were intervention. And then a total of 20 care coordinators, so 10 were control and 10 were intervention. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Janet, who's going to talk about our findings.
Sure. So one thing that I think we didn't mention was who the AMP coaches were. So the coaches were actually students, university students, both undergrad and master's level students. And Charisse was a coach as an undergrad, and Celeste was sort of our coach's coach. So she was in charge of making sure that everybody learned what they needed to do. So this is looking at the data that we got from videotaping the first meeting. For those who had been in the intervention, that would be the intervention after the AMP after they had received those 3 sessions of AMP coaching to prepare them for the team meeting. And for the control young people, it would just be basically a meeting as usual, except of course there's a video camera there and you just took a bunch of assessments, and you'll see there's definitely an impact from that in the other data. So what we found, so we tried to measure various aspects of participation, and basically what you'll see, control and intervention, is the percentage of segments. So we looked at 1-minute segments where this thing was going on. And one thing that we found in our pre-post study was the teams, after they were doing AMP, they were actually much more organized because everybody had to get their agenda items. So one of the things we asked the organization to do, they have to give their agenda items to the young person beforehand so that the coach and the young person can work on preparing. And between that and the little outline that we had for our agenda, it seemed that people were actually staying on task more. We didn't get a significant finding. You can see there's a T over there. That means a trend level finding, not quite significant. And then the final column is adjusted for multiple comparisons. So we were, we're pretty conservative in that final column about what we actually call a finding. So we had the youth leading completely these are minute segments, so they led more significantly, leading, then also speaking a significant amount of the segment was also more in the intervention. So every comparison favored the intervention, but only some of them were significant. We had some criteria for team having essentially a kind of positive or strengths-based interaction with the youth, also in favor, but not significantly so, of the intervention. The youth, again, we stress this sort of pragmatic communication between the young person and the team. You know, how can you express something so your team is going to be most likely to hear it, to want to support what you have to say. So that's a big part of our coaching. Again, that was significant to trend after adjustment for the multiple comparisons. This one's team invite high-level contribution. This is when the team is engaging the young person and asking for their opinions, their ideas, etc. Clearly, it was happening more in the intervention. Supportive response to ideas, again, about equal. Team agreeing to act on the youth's idea only seemed to happen in the intervention case. And then we did find, we have this idea of process advocacy, which we think of as another way of it's used in the team literature a lot to show good team process going on, so people making different comments about how the meeting is going and what has to happen next, or the agenda, etc. Again, in favor pretty distinctly for the intervention group. So that was video data. Then we also, as Celeste mentioned, we collected post-meeting surveys for all 3 times. And that was broken out into 2 different scales. One that was looking at just the different aspects of youth participation. And you can see some of the samples there. They had multiple opportunities to present their ideas. They participated meaningfully in discussion. They had ideas on agenda items that weren't just their own, etc. So there were 9 items for that, and that's the alpha for the internal reliability of the scale. And then there was a getting things done scale that kind of got at that other aspect. You know, did they stick to the agenda, get important planning, etc. done? So we wanted to see from their perspective were these things happening, not just from the sort of objective measures that we were using from the analysis of the video. And so these are just numbers. We had everybody that was in the meeting do a survey. I have not yet attempted to do any more sophisticated analyses by role, but those are the roles. We did look across time, and I'll be showing that in a second. Actually, that's not true. We did a little bit by role, but not everything that you could look at. So you can see here what you're seeing here. So we put all of the items on a scale of 4 being the best and 1 being the worst. And you can see that the intervention had higher scores across the 3 meetings than the control group for that scale composed of youth participation items. And there was a significant effect in favor of the intervention. And you can see also there was also, you can see there, it was also a significant meeting effect where the overall positive nature of the meeting of youth participation was deteriorating over time. And the fact that that happened in the control meeting as well, across the control meetings as well as the intervention meetings, I think is probably just part of that. We were in the meetings, people knew they were part of the research project, everybody was being interviewed, everybody was giving feedback, etc. So there was a deterioration. I think also, as the other data will show, we'll talk about this later, I actually think for the intervention youth, the handoff to the care coordinators proved somewhat problematic. Getting them to actually do even so our protocol calls for this sort of big, the 3 sessions of AMP before the first meeting, and then what we call booster sessions in between, which are not supposed to be as involved. But it was really difficult to pass over the AMP intervention, I think, effectively to the care coordinators, because they hadn't been so thoroughly trained in the AMP model as our coaches had. And I'll talk a little bit more about what our response to that challenge has been. So similarly, getting things done, there was still an advantage for the intervention, not the meeting. The main effect for intervention, the meeting effect was not present in this analysis. And then overall satisfaction, this is based on actually 1 question where people were asking, was the meeting, rating whether the meeting was is not as worse than usual, really worse than usual, a little worse than usual, somewhat better than usual, a lot better than usual. And most people pretty much like their wraparound meetings, but again, in favor of the intervention. And why we like this, and I also broke this out for care coordinators and caregivers separately, is because I think there's a fear sometimes that if you give over maybe too much of the meeting to the young person's concerns, that other people will feel that their concerns are being crowded out. We did not find that at all in our data. So we feel like everybody, it was a win-win, not a win-lose. So that was something that we were very concerned about, and I think that if it's not handled right, it can become maybe more confrontational. But our process is very much, again, about that pragmatic. How can you enlist the help of your team? So this is the final set of data that we had from the assessments of phone, or they were either in person, over the phone, or online, depending on who the respondent was and what their preferences were. So this is a summary of a bunch of different stuff. These are basically regressions that are looking at the difference in the scale, in the assessment between time 1 and time 2 based on whether they were in the intervention or not, what their role was, and whether there was an interaction between those two. And you can see generally that there were stronger effects for the most part at T1, from T1 to T2. Again, we had that issue of the handoff after the first team meeting, maybe also the novelty effect wearing off. But we had very strong effects for this is the youth participation in planning scale. So from people's, wow, 5 minutes? Okay, so we had very strong impacts on the planning. This SFSS, this is symptoms and functioning severity scale that we used for externalizing and internalizing. We didn't necessarily think we were going to see huge change there, but again, everything was in favor and trending in favor of the intervention group. We think if we had a more ambitious intervention, oh, thank you. Oh, but we're only half an hour.
Okay.
So now you're really confusing me. Okay. We're back to really rushing through. So we were gratified that things were going in the right direction, but really not surprised. I mean, they're getting wraparound, they're getting 1 million services. AMP is a small component, and it's really designed to be an intervention that enhances engagement. We do think over time that we might have a bigger impact, but we're only looking at 6 to 8 weeks out here, so not a lot of time for things to develop. So here's an example of all respondents on the participation in planning, the preparation subscale for that. This looks pretty typical. Control mostly flat, intervention peaking at T2 but still staying above at T3. So I mean, I would say that sort of picture characterizes a fair amount of our findings. I'd have to do a bunch of slides to show it all. So we had some youth-only measure. The WAI is the team alignment, what's it called? Alliance, whatever. It's Alliance scale. It's the one that everybody uses. We changed it to be team Alliance. We did collect this data for the caregivers and the care coordinators, but the wording on the team stuff was very strange. So this just is showing the young people felt that their provider alliance was improving at time 3, and our empowerment scales, again, they were trending in the right direction, but not significant. And also, this is only the youth. So again, we have only 1/3 the sample at this point. So our model has to be is less sensitive. Okay, so very briefly, I think we have from that pretty decent evidence that AMP can have a significant impact on youth engagement and participation, and that's measured on kind of a variety of different modalities and different perspectives. And the impact from youth is particularly pronounced. I actually skipped over a little bit of that analysis, but there were some of those interactions for young people that were significant, indicating an additional impact from AMP. Not a zero-sum approach, as I mentioned, the difficulty in handoff to the care coordinators, and then perhaps if there were a higher dose or a longer duration, that it might actually impact those empowerment and the empowerment measure and the mental health status to a significant level. And we're going to talk then now about what we wanted to build on as a basis. We have since kind of divided up Original AMP and focused on just training the care coordinators to do the AMP process. So we have a project now that we're evaluating with state of Massachusetts where they're implementing AMP statewide. And I think they're pretty happy with it. They certainly said so this morning.
Yeah.
And we are taking some assessment, but it's mostly assessment of perceived competencies on the part of the providers there that we're measuring, because we don't have the resources for that study to look at outcomes. And then we have also been training, we developed and are now pilot testing the AMP, what we're calling AMP Plus as a peer support. So the coaches will actually be peer support and they will stay engaged with the young person. So none of that handoff stuff. The handoff stuff was just not gonna work. And I'm gonna turn it over to you guys again to talk a little bit about our training approach, because it was something that we learned a lot about while we were doing this.
So very, very quickly, the training model that we use and that has been really effective in our trainings with Massachusetts, who I know is in here, hey, and we're also working with Kentucky with our AMP Plus model. But really, the key thing is that the trainees will review a piece of the AMP curriculum. So we will present a piece of the curriculum, and then they will get to watch an expert coach go through how to do that prep session or that work. And then they'll get a chance to practice. So they'll go out, they'll get a practice with maybe, if it's their first time trying it out with what we like to call a practice person, so maybe not a client, but someone that they can practice the intervention with. And then they get to have some feedback. So Therese and myself will review the video, we'll watch it, we'll look for things that are going really well, and also areas where maybe the coach can improve. Sometimes that includes curriculum clarification, and just elements that we can talk through about how to strengthen the coach's approach. And we've found that no one loves to videotape themselves and submit it online to us, but it is a very effective tool in seeing practice in action and then also getting that loop of feedback. And then basically we then repeat the process again, so then we move on to the next chunk of the curriculum, and then there's a chance to observe, practice, and receive feedback. And in case you're wondering how we do that, we use this tool. It's called the Virtual Coaching Platform, and it's a web-based tool where we get to watch the video. We have our themes and techniques that we're looking for, and it's broken into 1-minute segments, and then we have a chance to then put in comments, and those are the comments that lead our feedback conversations with the people who are being trained. And we're looking specifically for our themes, and I just had to put these on here because we love them and they guide our work. But youth-driven, helping the young person to identify their strengths and assets, positive connections to people and community, expanding skills and promoting discovery, and then guiding, keeping it on track. And that's specifically what the coach is doing in this session. They're making sure that not only are they engaging with the young person in a positive way, but are they working towards something? Are they moving in a direction? So, some helpful things about the VCP. The coach can watch example videos through the VCP, so that's where we can put those example videos up of a lead coach doing the intervention. They can also watch their uploaded videos, which who has either listened to those process recordings or themselves in action? Okay, we know that it can be a little uncomfortable, but it's such a powerful learning tool. And then the last little piece is that we can create clips and the coaches can go on and also observe those clips. And we're out of time, so I'm going to stop. So, I think, last slide.
So just one clarifying thing in case it was confusing. So we're in Oregon and they're in Massachusetts and we don't go there at all. All of this is based on online learning, designed kind of more along the lines of what a college course would be versus what a typical, kind of 1 week learn it all sort of training. So this is a model that we think really corresponds to kind of best practices in coaching and training, so that there's a kind of a slow accumulation of knowledge and practice through research.